for joining us on our session. So it looks like we have a mixture of middle school and high school teachers between world, US, geography, civics, and basically the idea is to share tips, tricks, and strategies in general activities, in addition to project-based learning. So we've included activities from project-based learning, and then different types of curated resources that we've curated along the way. So if you're just joining us, I've added the Wakelet, and the video, once it's rendered, will be added to the Wakelet as well. The shared screen is on, so feel free to share screen, and I'll go ahead and go to the background and just monitor the chat in addition to people who are in the waiting room. Thank you for joining us. And feel free to share at any point.
So I'm just curious what, where all of you guys are, what you're doing in terms of projects and the project-based learning. Is that something that's integrated into your curriculum or something that your districts are encouraging you to do more of? Maybe we can start there. Just.
So in the state of Kansas, that's actually basically what our state assessment is now. It'll be brand new this next year, but they pretty much pushed us into a more of a PBL-based state assessment with the rubric and everything. I mean, you could write a paper and you could find a way to match it with the rubric. But I think the general idea was to get into more of a project-based assessment.
Laura, are you done? I didn't want to jump in on top of you.
No, it's okay. I'm sitting outside and I was hoping it would like cut out, and my husband's watching TV, so I'm just like, I'm hoping I can do this. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm kind of new to PBL, I think. Although the more I look through and read about it, the more I'm thinking, well, actually, a lot of the things I've been doing really would kind of fit into that. So I feel like I'm really happy that I'm getting a lot of good information from you guys that have more experience. But yeah, our school, I work at a really small public nonprofit charter school that's arts integration centered, and we're trying really hard to push our whole school to use PBL next year.
I've been using PBL since I got my license back in 2010. When students come back to me and send me emails years later, they don't talk about the lectures I gave or the stories I told. They talk about what they learned from the projects, especially in the economics courses I teach. I put the vast majority of their grades into the projects, and whether that's a personal budget or whether it's a fiscal and monetary policy simulation or starting a business or a stock tracking activity, those are the things that they remember, like the stuff that they actually had an active part in and got to make some choices in. And so I started out with that because I thought that would be more interesting than just me talking all the time. And that's been borne out over the years that I've been teaching.
Mm. Yeah, Laura, I was looking at that too. It looks like it has a lot of great ideas.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I'm not a formal educator, so I've written curriculum. I'm the outreach director for Journeys in Film, which we create curriculum for films. And then I am a parent, and my kids have always gone to project-based learning schools. And I homeschooled them this last year with COVID, and really took that approach of project-based. And then how do I take regular curriculum that I'm finding online and like add project elements? So and I recently am writing an article on project-based learning, and I recently interviewed an educator and also a parent, and her child in college was like, because she'd always done project-based learning her whole career in her charter school, she was like, I was the most prepared for college versus other students. And what the other teacher was just saying, of hearing feedback from his students, it really made me think of that, how a lot of students that have gone through that feel really prepared for collaborative workplaces and for college courses. So it's really exciting to see the growth of project-based learning.
I think too, it also shows them time management skills and how to, if they're working in a group, how to delegate. So one of the things, and I'm kind of jumping in late here, so I apologize if this has already kind of been brought up, but one of the things I always stress with, I teach middle school, I'm an 8th grade teacher, so sometimes I think that kind of lends itself a little bit more for project-based learning, because the students are a little bit more, I guess, open to working collaboratively. I think sometimes in the older grades, they've been jaded against group work if they've always been the one that has kind of, carried the group throughout. But one of the things I always stress during like the first couple of projects is, let's use this as a learning experience. And I always give them a survey afterwards about what worked, what didn't work. And I think they really respond well to that, kind of looking at it as a learning experience and something that they can continue improving, instead of just looking at it being just an assessment of their content knowledge or application of skills, but also knowing that it's a skill in itself to work with other people.
Along those lines, I was curious, as following up on Angela's question, how frequently are you using projects? And going into Carolee's comment as far as choice, how much choice is there going to be? Are you all using choice boards, or is it like one standard project, like a labor of love kind of project, that your baby that you've been working on like for X amount of years, or are they doing projects throughout?
I think I usually I teach high school, 9th and 10th grade world history, and I have pretty clear guidelines, especially at the beginning of the year, especially 9th graders. I don't know what they're coming in with. So something that's it's more simple, but like sort of clearly defined, in the beginning of the year. And then towards the end of the year, this year I ended with, and I'll share a little bit later, a much more open-ended inquiry project, because I want to make sure that they have sort of like the media literacy skills, the research skills, and sort of building on that so that they are able to engage into a much more complex project by the end of the year. And I do that with my 10th graders as well.
For me, it depends on the course. If I'm in an elective course like sociology, that doesn't have like strict state standards for Minnesota, I do a lot more choice projects. Like I give them kind of a curated list of ideas or types of projects, whether that be an art project or, it could be a paper, could be classroom lesson almost that they would teach, right? There's a lot of options there. In economics, I use the projects to cover specific standards material, so they don't get as much choice there, but they do get choices within the project about how they want to move forward.
I'm really curious about how you guys balance, somebody asked about that, but how you balance whether they can do it individually or in groups.
I do a mix of everything. I do one in my econ course that's mostly project based. I do one strictly individual project, one strictly group project, one where they can be alone or with one partner, and then one where they're in a group, but their grade is based on their individual work. So I mix it up that way and try to give them choices where I can.
Sorry, Mary Elise,
Is it just me?
Yeah, I can't understand.
Okay, you're coming through very garbled.
So for me, Mary Ellen, it goes back to differentiation. And you know, that obviously there's like the labor of love where they could do the one-off kind of thing. But in some classes, they're gonna need a lot more support than in others. Sometimes, so within the groups, like 2s, 3s, 4s, I do give them a lot of element of choice even within the groups. And then every time, it's kind of like a more of choice. They have to evaluate themselves within the group, like individually, how the group did, how the partner did, and then they evaluate, like, as part of that process, why that particular kid got said grade. It's completely anonymous, like nobody finds out why, but like the fact that it's always kind of evaluative, and if they would work with that other student again, why or why not kind of deal.
A lot of my group work I do as I tend to give the choice. In some classes though, depending on the personalities, and you guys know this, like everyone's going to choose to work alone, just based on like the groupings and how the schedule is or whatever. So usually if I really want a good group experience, I'll throw that into some sort of like simulation where they have specific roles. So like, for example, like a World War I simulation I do, they discuss the terms of the Treaty of Versailles and what's going to happen now that the war is over and how are they going to prevent going back to fighting. So they tend to do a little bit better with very defined roles if I do want them to work in groups, because that kind of gets rid of a little bit of like social anxiety of what am I going to say if I give them very specific parameters. So what I found that really works is if I give them an objective and tell them, okay, in order to be successful in this project or this simulation, you have to meet like these 2 or 3 objectives. I do the same thing in the Cold War, where I do like a big group of like NATO countries and then Warsaw Pact countries and then a couple of like independent countries. And they do really well with that because they know the only thing that they're really responsible for in big picture is meeting those objectives and being able to reflect on those objectives. So that's kind of worked well for me.
Samantha, where are you teaching that you get to teach such cool topics for 8th grade? Because that's like, I mean, most schools that do 8th grade, it's like, you know, Revolution and Civil War.
Yeah, so I teach right outside of Chicago, and it's called River Forest, but my school district is very small. So the perk of that is I'm the only 8th grade social studies teacher. There's a 7th grade social studies teacher, and we work collaboratively as a department, but she has the like pre-Columbian till Civil War, and I have Reconstruction until as far as I can get. But the nice thing is that we have a lot of autonomy. For better or worse, our district doesn't really care about social studies, which is a double-edged sword because it gives me a ton of autonomy, but then we don't have the resources that get pushed into like our like STEM programs. So the cool thing is I write my own curriculum and no one ever says anything like, hey, don't do that. As long as I meet my standards and as long as my kids are doing well, then that's been working so far.
I'd love to share with you, Samantha, because I teach it in modern world history and some of the very similar ideas. I'd love to see what you specifically do with that and maybe share some resources at some point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I made a note to myself to touch base with you too, because one of my favorite things when we do the World War I unit that I love to do is we do like a simulation, and ours is usually just getting into the war, but I love the idea of like then following it up with that would be great.
Yeah, their depth of learning and understanding is so much better when I started doing that, because I always felt like, you know, everyone is talking about, I teach an American history course, but I always tell the kids, you can't understand American history without also bringing in global events, obviously, especially so in world wars. But like the focus always gets, you know, to Germany and France and kind of what's going on there. And this gives them the ability to really understand some of the precursor events within Europe that kind of led to the war happening. And they ask great questions and they start to make connections. We do kind of a follow-up with this. I call it contextualization bingo, about how everything relates back. Well, most global issues you can kind of relate back to World War I, and they really start to see, especially in terms of like our current climate in the Middle East, how a lot of that is due to the colonialism in the Middle East following the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So it's really cool to see them be able to connect those dots. Yeah, so we do the contextualization bingo as a game. I give them a list of, I give them the bingo card that I made on Canva, which was super easy to do. I highly recommend if you guys haven't used Canva. I use it all the time. And then I give them a cheat sheet that gives them like 2 or 3 sentences about the event, with some details about like where, when, and who was involved. And then from there, when they think they have bingo, they have to come up and tell me how those events are connected. This past year, when I had kids remote and in person, once they thought they had bingo, they would type it to me in the chat and kind of explain. And I had one student go completely off the walls, and she said the group ABBA had connections to World War I and the Cold War, and she kind of went with that. So it was cool to see their own kind of take on it too.
Now I really want to hear a series of ABBA songs done as World War I songs.
Yeah, I have the card. Hold on, I'll look for it and then I'll share it with you guys. Hold on one sec. All right. So, I don't know if you guys can see it. Can you see it okay? So obviously, you know, I do the kind of free space, and some of these, there's not like a super direct correlation. Some are more obvious than the others, but it was interesting to see, for like example, the Exxon Valdez spill. They tied that in to industrialization. And I was like, okay, you know, I kind of put that on there as a throwaway one, but their explanation was really cool. And it made sense to me. So I gave that to them. So a lot of these, some of them are kind of just direct influence, like, for example, like the British Mandate for Palestine. Others are a little bit more abstract, which also works as a good way for me to kind of gauge, like, where are they kind of struggling with those application of historical thinking skills with looking at cause and effect. So it's kind of a good way for me to kind of check in and see how they're doing as well. But this is what I used this past year, and kind of went from there, and they did a good job with it. I do let them work in groups for this, which worked well too. And if anyone wants that, I'd be happy to email it too. I have my cheat sheet too that I can share with you guys.
Since we're talking about games and reviews, I actually am going to put in the chat our Jackson Jenga. And so we just use Jenga blocks, and they all have numbers on them. And so the kids will go up and they'll pull a number out, and it correlates with one of the slides on the slideshow. So you could do it with anything. The Jackson Jenga just kind of runs off the old tongue. But anyway, they love it. It's super competitive. They don't even realize they're reviewing. They can get 2 points if they get it correct by themselves, 1 point if they actually have to call on their team. So I just divide up the class into 2. And usually I have the Jenga sitting on a table in the middle of the room, and I have to put like masking tape all around the table, like a perimeter around it, because they usually want to assist everyone else with the Jenga or offer their own thoughts about which block to pull. And so anyway, this allows them to feel like they have the space. But I always tell the kids that are quiet and maybe don't know it, I'm like, hey, you should pull first so that you're not being yelled at when you knock it over. But anyway, the kids always have fun with that.
Does anyone else want to share about project-based learning, or questions that you have about it?
I actually have a question. I'm looking to start doing more of it. And this past year was not the year to really start that, of course. But just kind of curious, we've talked about individual and group. I'd like to know how many of you do all of your project-based learning in the classroom versus outside of the classroom? Because I have seen some real equity issues with doing anything at home, and I try to avoid almost any work that goes home.
I have a kind of a general rule that was pretty much my standard practice before COVID, is that I don't do anything at home because I want to see them do it. And so COVID changed things a little bit, but it also changed the way I taught it and my expectations. So the things that I want them to turn in, like I want, I kind of understand if there's a parent influence or whatever, that I'm going to see that in a project. We did a project where the kids had to build a model, a gingerbread model of our town, our community. They had to pick a building in it. Why was that building important to the community? And then they had to make a gingerbread one. And it was at Christmas time. So it was super fun, but we were in remote at that point. I had a boy turn in a project, and this poor kid probably couldn't, I don't know, putting anything like frosting on a graham cracker would have been a real challenge. But he turned in our local movie theater, complete with working lights. And I was like, okay, good job, buddy. You did it. Like, oh, it was so ridiculous. But I was like, it is what it is. Like, to me, if there's a possibility that a parent can influence, to me, the amount that it's worth actually goes down. Not the score. Like, I'll still get, it's fine. You got 100%. Good job. But I'm not going to make it as high of a priority grade if I know the parent can do it. So most of my things, I just allot time for. We do a Netflix TV show where they're creating a series on the War of 1812. And it's a 4-day thing in class. Like, you have to finish it in class. We're not doing this at home. And there's certain expectations that have to be met every day, because I want to know that they're doing it here, you know, in my room or whatever, and not having a parent complete it. So after the working lights at the theater, Grant and the gingerbread house, I was like, oh, brother, gotta keep my standards lower for those.
My kids too, at their project-based learning focused charter, all of it was done at school, which I really appreciated as a parent, for a lot of the reasons she mentioned. So now my partner teaches film, and sometimes students are doing that stuff outside of class in high school, but I think high school is a little different than lower grades too.
I was going to say, the way that I've been approaching it, and I am understanding the equity issue, is that I have, for the stuff they do at home, is I assign very concrete tasks, like sort of breaking up the different tasks. Like, everyone needs to bring in one article, or, you know, or everyone has to read this and bring in your answers. And from there to start sort of building and doing most of the work at school. Because I was finding that, I mean, really, some kids, families are able to provide these incredible resources. And of course, it's all like bells and whistles, right? But I'm much more concerned. And the other thing I've done to sort of make that a little bit more equitable is, I'm much more concerned and more heavily weigh the content of it, that, right, rather than the bells and whistles. Sometimes that doesn't even get on the rubric. It's like, you can do that if you want, but what's the real, you know, like, what's the core of it? And then some of them doing it on, like, digitally. Like, I had one group, one project was virtual museum this year. And that's really, actually, that was kind of nice, because I didn't have to worry about, oh, our kid's going to go out and spend lots of money on these, you know, various resources. They all had to access the same resources.
Which is why, like, I know everybody loves this, and I know this is probably not the crowd to complain, but NHD a lot of times, like, and as being a judge at the district, and, you know, beyond the district level, and just seeing all these projects, like, it's not very equitable, and it's just so hard to, you know, to just evaluate, like, getting into that.
A follow-up question I would love to kind of get your feedback on from everyone is like the use of rubrics. I love and hate them. I feel like so many students, you know, I put so much effort into being very specific, and they just don't even look at them. Does anyone have a good rubric kind of template or anything that they use, or do you guys use one throughout the year for all of your projects? Because I've toyed with that idea as well, making one for the entire year. So I would love to hear feedback about how you guys use rubrics.
I have a suggestion. I use a single column rubric, and I just describe what perfect is, and then I don't have to worry about using my imagination to decide how many mistakes they can make and how many points off. If that's there, it's this many points. If it's partial, you know, I do partial points or whatever. And sometimes I have some points left over, and I just have to put a box for teacher discretion. So if it's really didn't live up to it, then I take points off. Or if you went above, I might even throw extra points in there. But that single column rubric has reduced my stress greatly.
Yeah, I mostly do that too. Although I will say, I just at the NCSS pop-up, I just did a thing on critical reflective narratives, and I really liked the idea. I'm not 100% sure how I'm gonna, like, I don't think I'll just replace all rubrics with it, but I really like the idea of remembering to just have them do a reflective narrative more often. So.
One, I'm not good with rubrics. I grade really generously. I want them just to be critical thinkers and empathetic people who learn history and see how it affects the past and our present and all that stuff. But one really good piece of advice I learned zillions of years ago when I first was teaching that I keep in mind all the time is that when you do a group project, make sure that the group grade, what did they say? Like the individual grade is more than like half of the group grade. Because my niece is like a resident, my nephew's getting his computer science PhD, and my sister and brother-in-law are still bitter about their group projects in high school. And I think lots of times teachers don't set up the clearly defined roles and the grading, you know, how you assign the grades for everyone correctly. So I make it so that no one kid can like ruin the whole project if they don't do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think maybe as my district, we're kind of moving towards standards-based grading. So I think maybe that'll help. But I do have a lot of like point grubbers because the district, the community, I should say, it's not even the district, is just like very set on, you know, you should be getting in 99%, if not higher. So then I get well, why did I get 1 point off here? What's this? So that's kind of where that's stemming from. But I think, you know, I'm the same way. I want them to be critical thinkers. The grades and everything are kind of outside of that. But hopefully as we move towards standard-based grading, that'll kind of mitigate that issue.
And if you, yeah, I mean, great. I mean, grades are the not fun part of teaching, I think. But another thing is it's also like I tell the kids who always want to opt out and not do it together. I don't always give them the option to work by themselves, but I do give them the option because I do have a lot of time and reflection and I listen to my kids and I really do change what I do because of what they say. But I tell them, you know, the world, you have to learn to collaborate. That's the world that we live in. And so like I have community circles every week with my students, and even like, I think I was doing this before then the pandemic hit. Even like going, oh, these groups need to learn how to work together. So I even did this little paper airplane, just a group activity for that group to learn how to work together before, you know, so give them something low stakes so that when they get to the big stakes things, they're hopefully learning how to work together, which is, you know, it's the whole year and beyond.
It's really funny though to see the gifted students by Christmas they figured out you're going to do a group project, you want to work with the other gifted kids because you know they're actually going to do what they're supposed to be doing.
I think some of the build up to maybe larger group projects too. I have all my students in study groups too, where they do activities together so they can sort of learn about each other and realize that whatever task, you know, whatever competition that I have given them, if they work together, it's going to be much better, right? So before even introducing a project, I have them working in these study groups. The first term, I always allow them to choose. And a lot of them realize really quickly that choosing their best friend was not a good idea because their best friend is going to slack. And then second term, I usually allow them to choose again, but they cannot they cannot be in the same groups as others. And then I say third term, because by then I know them. Third term, I'm going to choose. So by then I have a better idea who might work well together, even if they're not friends, even if they've never really collaborated together. But I think earlier in the year, these low stakes group activities is the way to sort of start building up to some of the larger projects.
I wish I could easily find it. I have a very funny picture of one of my students who was in a group and he kept forgetting and he kept forgetting and he kept forgetting to bring his part in. And somewhere I have a picture of him with, like, I'm not even exaggerating, he must have 50 Post-it notes all over himself that say, bring board. It's so funny. But yeah. I finally found a really cool picture of part of a PBL we did on World War I, if you want to see it real quick. But it's not like, I don't have the whole project written out or anything, but I did find, it was just, they did, here, I'll see if I can share it real quick, just so you can see what it looks like. Yeah, there we go. It just, they did art inspired. We were reading World War I poetry, and we were doing looking at World War I art, and then they combined their own art with acetate poetry. It was kind of cool. So.
Oh, is the acetate like a plastic layer?
Yeah, it's just like, yeah. So they did their art, and then on a piece of plastic, like sort of like overhead projector plastic, if you still remember that. Although I think you could just use like sheet protectors, I suppose, too. And they just Sharpie wrote like their poetry on it, and then it was really interesting, and it worked really well. So, and
that when you just said the transparency, I was like, oh, I think our department closet has like a whole pile of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, wow, I can find a use for that. It's so awesome.
That's another thing that I think always comes up to with like project-based learning is like when we think about like making something artistic and then you have the kids like, I can't draw. Like I always have to think of something sometimes when I have a group that's super artistic and like very talented, and then those who just for some reason their mind just doesn't work that way, and then I have to give like those more concrete kind of project options that aren't as creative, but for some students just works way better. So that's where I do like some film critiques sometimes, or have like pre-made templates that sometimes work, because I love seeing the artwork, but sometimes when you ask the kids to do art and then you get like these stick figures and I'm like, oh, shouldn't have done that one with you guys. So it's good to have that balance though, or that option to give them that creativity, but also have a backup plan in case you have students that just are not artistic.
Well, that's why I actually started doing the choice boards, because I love the good art projects. And so the kids that are artists, they want to do those projects. And so I still usually offer, because it's usually like one of the projects I did 6 years ago, or something. And I'm like, oh, I really remember we had a couple of good ones. So I'll throw that in as an option and keep that as something that they could choose. But most of the kids are like, well, I don't want to paint anything, But then you have that one that's like, oh my God, I get to use watercolors, So.
Although I will throw in, just as my curmudgeonly arts integration person, to some extent, you also just have to remember you have to, and this just adds to it, but you have to scaffold in the art skills too, right? I mean, they can't write an essay right out of the gate either. So,
well, actually this year I partnered with the art teacher on a couple of things, because I was thinking, I don't know how to teach art. I don't know any of it, but I've got a couple of fantastic artists in here. So what I did was I showed them my instructions and I said, do you think that kids could handle it based upon these instructions? Could I get a product from it? And she was like, oh my God, this is great. And she like looked over my rubric and gave me some feedback. And so like that was kind of the key, was pulling that person in as well.
Yeah, whenever I can buddy up with the specialist, I always love to do that, because then I know I'm going to have good scaffolding for the arts piece.
I think one thing I learned this year, and I've always kind of poo-pooed certain project choices, and one of them, and I shouldn't have, because one of them is interpretive dance. We always say, hey, let's make an interpretive dance, and we go, haha, funny, right? And this year, my daughter, who's a senior, who has danced for 14 years, for her final project in English, did interpretive dance. And I was like, oh no, is this going to be a disaster? But it made me think about, and actually when I saw her piece, and it actually made me cry, because it was so thoughtful, and you could really, and she had a written piece to go along with it in terms of like explaining. So it actually helped me frame my final project for my 9th grade history. And I framed it in a way is this, I wanted to give them an opportunity to utilize their talents. Like what isn't, because like you said, sometimes like art is not the natural way of expression. and I sort of blew it up, like anything goes. And I was quite surprised. It was such a good way to end the year, and that the kids were so invested because they were showing me, they were sort of showcasing to me, well, this is a side of me you don't know, right? And I found that to be really special. And I'm really glad that my daughter finished her art project before I even engaged with my students on that, or not her art project, but her English project, and that her teacher was so open-ended with it. Because it made me really think about like, wow, you know, my daughter has been dancing for 14 years. That's a real talent of hers that she can't really show unless, you know, at school, except through maybe her close friends know. But yeah, so I just wanted to just throw that out there because it was a very meaningful and emotional piece of me, and it totally changed my mind about interpretive dance.
Angela, there before I got the current position I have, I was an EA in the classroom with this terrific art teacher, and she had we saw the TED Talk on Dance Your PhD, which is really fun, and she used that as a jumping off point, and we ended up doing a interpretive dance piece on it was involved, but it was really fun, and it was a group project, and that way people that couldn't dance could still be included, because the ones that were really like gung-ho choreographers could come up with ways that they could just like be the arts or whatever. It was really cool. It was really fun seeing them do it together, and I don't really think of myself as a dancer, so I had a lot of fun seeing how, if you do it right, it was really fun for everyone. So
you said dance your PhD? I'm gonna find that and send it to her.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat. It's a TED Talk, and I was going to add it to the Wakelet, but I don't think I can actually add it to the Wakelet, but that's okay.
Well, one of the things my son got to do, he's really into video game and video game design, and he's learning coding. So he got to reflect his knowledge of a topic through Mario Maker. And I expected the teacher to say no, but she didn't. And it's a really cool project. He really was thoughtful, and he really thought about it, and he built, you know, worlds that would reflect different things he was trying to demonstrate. So it wasn't just thrown together. Like, he spent a lot of time with it, and I really appreciated the teacher because she found a way to engage him, you know, and not make video games this like waste of time, but understood that he was reflecting on the topic and creating a product that reflected what he had learned, and he really did. And so I really appreciated that she thought out of the box. And yeah, Minecraft, we use Minecraft a ton. I have a very spatial child who gets into graphing and graph paper, so we used Minecraft a ton in our homeschooling this year. And it's cool to have those tools for kids who think, I can't draw or I'm not artistic, but they just sometimes need a different set of tools than paints or pen and paper.
Okay, so all the links, thanks for sharing. I've added all the links so far to this point that everyone has shared. Plus people who are unable to make it, they said they're gonna send links to add to the Wakelet. I did add the session on dancing your PhD as well, and games for civics. I use a lot of gaming. On that thread, I'm a noob to Blookit. I know it's like really like spreading like wildfire, but like the kids really, really love it. I heard my math teacher, and normally like my neighbor math teacher, he doesn't really encourage so much like organized chaos, but it's just like the last month the kids were so crazy, and you know, trying to figure out what are you doing? Like, it's so loud all the time. All of a sudden, I've been next to you for 13 years. And, you know, I went in to watch and, you know, saw some YouTube videos on it, and just like, wow, all it is reviewing, but the kids really love it. And, you know, just taking those steps, like, for example, Minecraft EDU, which now you can get on the Chromebook. I think really for me as a gamer, still a gamer, I would have loved to have that opportunity beyond just like the Oregon Trail. And I love on that Oregon Trail thread that more and more game companies are getting more diverse and showing alternatives to those kinds of narratives.
Did anyone else have any shares of like some projects that you loved when you were little? And did you apply it to your classroom? Besides Mary Ellen, we're waiting for that cardboard digestion system.
I wish I had a picture of it. I vividly remember though, we took the big tall art desks and we kind of put them all together and made like a cave that was the stomach, and you had to go through like the pyloric valve to get into the stomach, and we had a recorded like soundtrack that was like, you are now entering the stomach, the sounds you are hearing are, and we were like dripping. It's very multimedia for 1970 whatever. It was really fun.
I think I can only remember one where we had to film a commercial and we had like the, handheld video recorder and everything, but I don't remember it being a good learning experience. I remember it being, a fun time with my friends and getting to see it in class. But I do like the PSAs. The kids love PSAs. They like making their own, PSAs. Flipgrid was great for that this past year, but I don't think it was executed when I was a student very well.
It always cracks me up how many of mine, well, especially the sixth graders, at the end of their Flipgrid like things say, like and subscribe.
I always made them reply to other people's, and seeing some of the replies were really funny too. They would like talk in different voices and put like different text blocks over their faces and stuff. And I was like, you guys know I'm looking at those, right? And they're like, yeah, but it was funny. It was worth it. All right. Well, whatever makes it work for you guys.
And Flipgrid is adding backgrounds now. So you can have different backgrounds and also these different
awesome.
filters. So yeah.
Oh, they would love that.
So Gabe, I had messaged you earlier and said I would love to do a little meta sort of, maybe we should have started with that, but because I have to go soon. But meta in terms of like, I was introduced to something called guided inquiry design. Has anyone used that before? I think it's fairly new out there. Yeah, Mary Ellen, yeah? Is that yes or a little bit? So I work very closely with my head librarian in our district, and she came to me and she said, I'm really, really excited about this. I'd read this book. I did some training over last summer. I'd love to introduce it to you. And when I sat down with it, I saw a lot of possibilities, but then when I started utilizing it, I was won over. I just wanted to show you really quickly and give as quick a sort of approach to it, because I feel like it's something that can be contracted or expanded as much as you want to, especially with this project-based learning approach. And they sort of have a framework, and I love frameworks because it allows me to sort of build anything in here, any kind of curriculum, and then age groups, what's appropriate for your age groups. And I feel that it reflects, just because it reflects and I've come from like a history background. So it reflects the authentic sort of historian's approach to bigger projects, right? If they're, inquiring about their PhD, their thesis, their book, or whatever. And I felt that it really reflects that, and it's a sort of research-based. So it starts off with opening the question or the essential question to the students, and then immersing them with sort of a common reading or common experience or common media, right? For them to start having sort of discussions about that. And then around whatever theme that you want them to do, And for my ninth graders this year, our theme, or it has been for the last 3 years, the theme was around migration. And then they can sort of explore what's out there. You know, you brainstormed all of these, you know, different ideas. It was kind of sort of like throwing stickies around and sort of looking at other people's. I actually think we did on a Jamboard. Explore, start seeing what resources are out there, right? And then start identifying what kind of question. And you see, we've done a lot of other kind of stuff before they even come up with their actual research or their inquiry question. And then once they've settled on their inquiry question, and this is the place where they can break off into groups because they have very similar inquiry questions, or decide, okay, I really want to do this alone. And then start gathering their resources. This is the research part. And once they've finished that research, that is when they're creating. And after that, to go to share with each other and then evaluating their work. So I really love this framework because, as you can see, it can be adjusted for any sort of grade level. Because I did it with my ninth graders, and then I did it with my AP history class, and gave them a very different sort of theme and focus. And I must say that when I was sharing some of the results that I had gotten this year, I was really, really pleased with. And especially like being pandemic teaching, and by June, I was like moving them through this, but they really got invested, right? It's that investment. And that was the first 4 steps. And that was where most of the investment came in. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you really quickly, sort of more meta sort of thinking and planning about it, about project-based learning. I actually just got the copy from my librarian. I read through it and I made my own worksheets. So it was pretty intuitive.
Mary Ellen, you said that you heard things about it, but not positive.
I don't think I had actually.
Oh,
when
okay.
I looked at the page, I was like, oh, this looks like a nice sort of, you know, scaffold, like framework. But I think I was thinking of something else. So
I'm sure like every kind of theory, framework, or whatever has their detractors. But I think walking through it with the different levels, different grades, I just was like, I'm so bought into it. And I never did training with them. I just worked with the librarian who did do training with them. And then sort of touch base with her throughout the whole process. And every rubric I wrote, everything I wrote, it was a real collaborative effort. And then she gave me feedback, and it was like sort of a back and forth. So it was a really good experience for me too.
No, it looks great because I always do like this research process, and it kind of captures some of that. But I think that's a great, like you said, it's a great framework because you can apply it to so many different things, and having that continuity over the course of the year for the students, that's going to make all the difference in the world for them to actually learn that process and be able to apply it in not just your class, but other classes as well.
Well, and it really reflects critical thinking, which I think is like the ultimate skill we want the students to grasp, right? Is because that will, if they go into a trade, if they go into an entrepreneurship, if they go into college, if they have that critical thinking piece. And so that really is what I saw reflected in that design is critical thinking.
And sometimes, I mean, maybe it's just for my 8th graders, but they have a real hard time understanding and being able to evaluate when they're using critical thinking skills. Like, we always have to go through, when I give them an assignment, like what critical thinking skill that's really helping them build. Otherwise, it's just this vague term that they don't really understand, you know, and then they don't know how to transfer that to other classes or other things too.
A lot of people saying UDL, and we still utilize that, but kind of less explicitly. But I think there's a lot of like overlap, UDL and this inquiry design.
yeah, I'd take training with Angela too. Sign me up.
How many units do we get? Professional growth hours.
All right.
Well, we're coming close to the end. Do you want to take a group picture?
Sure. Someone who's
All right.
technology savvy.
Whoever wants to be on it, stare at your camera and smile. We miss when people smile. Cheese. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in. I'm going to go ahead and work on the video. I'll post it either today or tomorrow. Feel free to add resources, keep sending in resources, and we'll share this out as well. Hopefully
Thank
everyone
you.
has a great summer.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much
Gabe.
for doing this, guys. I always learn so much from you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.